Hello there. I'm not sure if you guys can hear me. I think you might have to unmute yourself, but maybe just give me the heads up if you can hear me or not. Perfect. Thank you. I've got another minute or so, so we will just wait on to see if other people are joining us. Okay. Thank you, Mark. I'm reading a message that there was another seminar set up. Okay, so 7 o'clock. We've got some people there in attendance. It's certainly something that people can jump into. Um, you confirm with me whether you can actually see the PowerPoint presentation? Okay, perfect. I'm going to go back to the presentation mode then, and we will go from the top. When I'm in the presentation mode, and it's likely my IT capabilities, I cannot see the chat. So I would encourage people to unmic themselves and just ask a question, or if for whatever reason you can't see what I'm presenting, please stop me. I'm sure there is a way that I could, 1 second. Let's see if I can set this up so I can just get people to admit on their own. Okay, well, we're just going to have to go with it here. Hopefully everyone is in attendance, because as soon as I'm here, for whatever reason, I've lost my chat function. Okay, welcome. I'm Jackie Sinkeldam. I'm the senior partner at Aramasta Physiotherapy. And my goal today is to give you our personal experience when it comes to creating a business plan. So, of course, I did two science degrees, a human kinetics and my physiotherapy degree, and I started my own business. So I am definitely an entrepreneur, but I am not an accountant. What this talk is going to look like, it is absolutely drawing from my personal experience with submitting business plans over the last 25 years. As mentioned, I'm open to questions at any time, and please unmute yourself to ask those questions. Just to reinforce that I have no formal accounting training, although my accountant likes to remind me that I seem to want to know all of the details. And it is definitely important to always bring your questions to professionals like lawyers and accountants. Okay, so, when we think about a physiotherapy practice, of course, I'm thinking of private practice, whether that's orthopedics or neuro or even different pediatric clinics are opening now in the communities that we're in. So, we're regulated healthcare providers that are providing physiotherapy services for money. And, I think it's important for everyone to realize whether you're working for a private practice clinic or you're thinking of opening your own, that you can talk to pretty much any person that is in the sorry, just beeping again, in the service industry, and you will be able to get very good advice from people, because although we're providing a physiotherapy service, we are definitely in the service business. So that old saying, the client needs to come first, I think is still very important in our business. However, we do have to marry it with the idea that we are providing a healthcare service. So, you know, a lot of sometimes maybe the tactics that are used in the general service business aren't always transferable into our business. So we're here to talk about a business plan, and I think the biggest question you have to think about is where you're going to get the money to start this physiotherapy practice. Perhaps you're bringing your own personal financing in. Perhaps you're having money lent to you from families. My experience is definitely with borrowing from the bank, and we've always been very successful with that borrowing and the ability to service those loans very successfully. So I'm here to share the information that I provided to the banks over the years to get the financing needed to not only start, but to grow our business to where it's at today. So I went to the bank. So I think it's really important, and I did a little bit of Googling because I wondered what the basic kind of information on the internet would say when it comes to developing a business plan. And there is no doubt that in your business plan intro letter or in your section of your business plan, you want to talk about what you think makes yourself different. So, of course, this could be your personal strengths. It might be your standard of care, in comparison to the research that you've done in the community. It could be your unique population that you're treating. Definitely could be the geography of where you're actually proposing that your clinic is placed. And when you know all of the above, you'll really have a good sense of who your consumer is, which will absolutely drive your marketing plan. And for those that are listening next week, I'm going to talk a little bit about marketing, but you do still need to have that overall plan laid out for your business plan for the bank. So this is a very old website. I should have looked to see if this was still available, but there's lots of this research available. I like to look at this data anytime we're going to a new city. So I'll go to the Chamber of Commerce or the BDC, and I have some of those resources at the end of the presentation. And I like to look at, well, what does the population look like in the area that I'm moving to? So this is in Guelph. This is obviously old from the 2016 data. But it does give us ideas on the actual population of the city. And, it actually breaks it down by ages as well. So, we were and we continue to open, with the exception of our women's health clinic that is very much targeted to women. We do have general orthopedic practices of all ages. But you can start to see, even from your marketing and your program development and your niches, the age group of the people that are in the cities that you're going to. Equally as important is looking at employment, because again, depending on the type of clinic that you're running, we are running a general orthopedic clinic, so we were going to pull from lots of different industries. So we could see the types of industries that were in the city. And, that also gave us an idea of how many people would have extended health benefits, which is, really a big way that people fund their physiotherapy. So again, you can all kinds of different information that you can pull, and I think the bank wants to know that you've done that research. So, being able to speak to the demographics in the communities that you're going to is very important. So again, this looks at specifically thinking about benefits and the type of businesses, certainly education and government. We know that, those type of businesses are always going to have extended health benefits. And some of the other companies you might not know with certainty, but you can, make some guesses as to who may have access to insurance. So still thinking about the niche, maybe this is what we have put in our business plans is looking at summarizing. So for us, location was always a very big decision maker in where we put a clinic. So in the example of Guelph, we looked at a population base that is actually one of the highest income categories. So our first clinic that we opened 25 years ago, when we looked at the demographics of the people living in the area at that time, it was one of the highest income categories. And knowing that we're a service that people are paying money for or need to have employment that likely have benefits, it makes sense to think about um, people's income levels in the area. We also were um, very sensitive to, we didn't want to open a clinic and have to compete against someone right out of the gate. So we definitely picked an area where there wasn't another physiotherapy clinic. In fact, there were no other allied health. So there are examples of a lot of clinics that will open in close proximity to maybe a chiropractor or a massage therapist. But for us, we wanted to approach it with a little bit more of a safety net that we would be the only allied health provider in that area. We needed it to have a mixed clientele because we were not exclusively a pediatric clinic, nor were we exclusively a geriatric clinic. So we wanted to be able to pull. So our original Guelph clinic was across the street from a high school, so we knew we were going to be able to target some of those younger age groups. We were in a busy plaza that had free parking. That was a big thing for us and continues to be a big thing that we look for. There are certainly lots of examples of clinics that are in paid parking, and sometimes that is just the way the city is. Everyone's paying for parking, so maybe the clients wouldn't think that that would be a deterrent. We looked for anchors like grocery stores. Our ongoing joke is that we follow Tim Hortons around, but we wanted to find anchors that would make it more convenient for our clients to attend physiotherapy. So if they were coming twice a week for physio and they could also get their groceries at the same time, then they'd likely be more compliant with treatment. And we looked for some accessibility so that we were on a bus route. So this was all things that were highlighted in our niche summary of our business plan to our bank. So what or where would you want your location? So this is our example of our Alora clinic, which actually started off across the street in a typical type plaza. Because it's a small community, there weren't the same type of anchors. However, there's still a Tim Hortons that you have to drive by. And this particular clinic, we actually got the traffic info for how many cars went through our intersection. So we had some very good demographic details that we could show the bank that we were positioning ourselves in a very high visible area. Lucky for us, the land across the street became for sale. So we bought that land and we built our own building, which was also a great investment and an opportunity to consider when you think about business plans. So we're talking about location. So we've given some good highlights around things about your niche and about anchors. And now we're going to talk about space. I think that in my experience anyway, the bank appreciates the thought that goes in with how much square footage that you're assuming and why. So this is an example from our Georgetown clinic. So we were looking for 1,800 square feet. We run programs like pelvic physiotherapy and concussion management and massage therapy that absolutely require closed rooms. So we needed to think about that. Closed rooms also gives the ability to incorporate into your business plan the potential to develop passive income. Are you an exercise-based clinic? Certainly in orthopedics, I hope so, because there's lots of evidence to support that. So how much gym space are you going to be looking for? What does your reception area look like? Are you going to dedicate any space for different revenue sources like a retail store or other complementary revenue sources? A retail store for us is something that we tried, and for the amount of product that we sold, we realized pretty quickly it would better to dedicate that space to treatment area and simply have a wall that had products rather than having too much dedicated square footage. Um, Again, thinking about location, we talked about this a little bit about who are your competitors or who are people that could heighten your exposure. So if you're looking at other physio clinics, what I like to look at, and there's certainly no science or math, but seems to have worked well for us, is I like to look at how many dentists there are in the community. So I will figure out ratios of dentists per population because dentists also pull from extended healthcare benefits. So if people have dental coverage, they're probably going to have physio coverage. And I'll get an idea as to what that data looks like. I have other markers that I look at. For example, in cities, I might look at how many medical doctors there are relative to how many physiotherapists there are in that community as well. So I will start to see trends, and that helps me make a decision as to whether the market would warrant adding an increased physio exposure. We've talked a little bit about chiro. For us, we are a very manual therapy based clinic, so it doesn't make sense for us to position ourselves right next door to a chiropractor when we will be competing for a market that's pretty similar around low back pain patients. But if you're not a manual therapist and you're very exercise based, then perhaps that actually gives you increased exposure. And that's what we have looked for when we think about some other things like we like to be beside gyms or Pilates studios because we can develop good partnerships with them, and we have a very nice way to refer people out into community-based programs. Likewise, with our women's health clinics, if we can position ourselves to be close to midwives, obstetricians, or other community groups that attract moms or young families, those can be synergistic. So all of this is what I would be outlining in my business plan when I'm talking about my location. I've already talked a little bit about the secret sauce, looking at the different ratios. Again, I can't give you any guarantee that my ratios mean anything, but they seem to be working for me. Okay, the bank's going to want to know what are your expenses going to be, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. But rent is likely, in my experience, the second biggest expense you're going to have next to your employee wages. So one thing to be thinking about, and this was certainly not really something I understood well when I was writing my first business plan, is when you're looking at rent, you're always going to have a base rent plus some type of an additional rent. Often that additional rent is referred to as CAMs, which stands for common areas and maintenance fees. Sometimes it's called TMIs, which stands for taxes, maintenance, and interest. But either way, you're paying it. So often when something's advertised, as in this case, it would say $21 a square foot plus $12 CAM. The CAMs are actually typically not a fixed cost because they represent the cost of maintaining the plaza, and they will vary. And we've had years of lots of snow, and at the end of the year, you get an extra bill from your landlord for the extra snow removal. But in any event, suffice it to say, the current landscape for rent in plazas that we typically go in are not that cheap. So we're paying about $33 a square foot. So if you picture that 12 by 12 ceramic tile, that's every step is $33. Um, Most of our clinics that are servicing a 3 to 4 physio clinic, open 7 a.m. till 8 p.m. are about 1,800 square feet. So using that math, you're looking at $59,000 plus HST, which is often a number that people forget about when they are predicting their expenses. So cash flow wise, you're looking at an annual expense of about $67,000 a year. So you want to think about that when we talk about the two really important pieces of a business plan being your profit and loss and your cash flow. This is definitely a big cash flow pull. Whoops. Terms of the lease, often people will want to go into a situation where they're not committing the next 10 years of their life. Most new businesses probably are looking for a 5-year lease. I haven't seen a lease signed in for anything less than 5 years in a long time. Because we have a different level of experience and confidence, we're usually going in with a 10-year lease, because if we negotiate a 10-year lease, we can try and keep better control of this base rent. And there is some value to landlords when you're signing longer leases. It actually is more favorable for them with their own potential personal financing of the plaza. So you can tend to be a bit more aggressive when you're negotiating your base rent when you're signing longer leases. Always, always, always make sure that you have an option to renew. You don't want to get to the end of your 5 or 10 years and find out your landlord has decided someone else is going in that space. You want that option to renew. And I always ask for exclusivity clauses. So I definitely ask for physiotherapy, but I also ask for massage therapy, chiro, naturopathic medicine. I try and ask for as much exclusivity so that I have the opportunity to bring those people into our practice versus seeing them go in the plaza and likely experience some gains because of the traffic that we bring in. Um, Always think about negotiating rent-free periods, which will help your initial cash flow, especially if you're having to do considerable leaseholds. Most landlords will give you what's called a fixturing period, which you may not pay any rent, or you might only pay the CAMs while you're applying for permits and having your contractor set your space up. And you always will want to try and ask your landlords to pay for the leasehold improvements. They obviously own the building, and the fixtures are theirs to keep. Most leases will say the fixtures are theirs to keep. So you want to try and recover that cost. That has changed in my experience, where in the beginning, 25 years ago, the landlord paid for all of the leaseholds, whereas now we're really only getting smaller percentages paid for. I haven't heard from anyone. Do I need to go back and check the chat? Or just have a quick peek. Everyone good? Okay. Okay, so this is actually our Georgetown clinic that we moved to a bigger location right before COVID, so it was a kind of a tricky time for us. But it was advertised at $29 a square foot plus 921 CAMs. We noted that this space had been unoccupied for 4 years. It was in a well-anchored plaza. It was just bigger than our space. So we were moving down the street, so it was very easy for me to go in and sign a 10-year lease. and be confident that we were going to be successful. So that helped us in the negotiations. So after we did secure the lease, and I'll share some of those details, the other thing to think about from a cash flow standpoint and your business plan is that we did have to give them a $15,000 deposit to actually uh, reserve the spot, secure the space. So as I said, that it was advertised at $29 a square foot. Because we were going in and signing a 10-year lease, this is what we offered them, that we'd start off at 27 and we'd go up. So we're finishing in the year 2030 at 3050, which was really interesting because the current space that we were in, we were already at $29 a square foot. And he had proposed to us that he wanted our rent to go up by 6% every 2 years. And we could not physically grow anymore in that clinic. We had run out of space. So this was a really good strategic move that I could also include in my business plan. So even though we had to pay for those leaseholds to be redone, I could demonstrate to the bank the point in time at which our rent savings paid for our leaseholds, because I went in cheaper than what I was currently at in my other lease space. So the bank definitely likes to know about your rent. In this particular case, when we're going to talk about, some equipment costs, that will be part of your requirements for the bank. But I was able to negotiate that after we finished our leasehold, so we still had to have the cash flow to pay our contractors. We did receive a $25,000 reimbursement back from our landlords. So it's always good to, start high, ask them to pay for everything, and see what sort of response that you get from them. So again, a bit of a summary of your marketing plan. We talked about this right at the beginning. This will be part of your business plan. So understanding your client list, where your clients are coming from, that probably reinforces your location, the community relationships and partnerships, the age group, and any key marketing niches that you have. So we're going to go into a lot more detail next week at the talk, but this is just an example of what would be in my marketing summary. It lets the bank know all of the different target markets that we have. And, in our actual formal marketing plan, we would have more detailed analysis as to what some of our strategies are. But this is just to give you guys a bit of a layered approach that certainly would illustrate to the bank that you have a strategic marketing plan in place. Okay, so in the business plan, you've talked about your strengths, you've talked about your location, you've talked about, your client needs, you've talked about your marketing plan. Now you have to get back to, like, how much money are you asking them for potentially starting this clinic. So you have to think about the equipment that you need. And I will share maybe on the chat after. I did do a quick Google search, and one of the companies that does supply a lot of physio supplies had a pretty good starting point, if not exhaustive equipment list. So it gives you a bit of a rough idea. But you're going to need, your clinical equipment, like your plinths and whatever modalities, whatever exercise equipment that you're going to have. But you're also going to need all of your office equipment as well, because sometimes we can, forget that we actually have to still have office and charting room equipment. Your leaseholds, the leaseholds can be incredibly exhaustive depending on the space that you're going into. That Georgetown clinic that I talked to you about, when I went to look at it, the floor was basically gravel. So we were doing everything. Expensive pieces of the leaseholds that it's nice when the landlord has included them is the rooftop HVAC, which controls your heating and air conditioning. We like to try and ask that to be included because the size of it is very specific to the unit. So it should be included. And if it's already there, you'll want to make sure that your lease notes that it's in good working order, because they can be quite expensive. And other than that, you most people are paying to run the venting and things like that to exactly where they need. So your fixtures are usually from floor to ceiling. Sometimes people forget about the signage. That outside sign can be quite pricey, and depending on the plaza that you're going into and what your landlord will approve, um, they do vary considerably in price. I don't know if you remember from the picture of that Alora clinic, but we put that pylon sign out there, and it was $30,000. So they are certainly not cheap. So when you're asking the bank for money, you're thinking about office clinical equipment, leaseholds, and then you have to think about, like, you're going to need some cash for operational setup as well. So every utility company is going to want deposits, your payment system machines, and some budget for that initial marketing campaign that you have highlighted as well. So this is all going to be cash requirements that you have to decide, are you asking the bank for that money or not? So the bank likes to use some language. So the first thing is capital needs, and capital needs are typically defined by the definition that it's usually over $1,000 something, whether it's a desk or a piece of equipment, and it's something that doesn't deteriorate over a period of time. So TheraBand is not a capital equipment because it obviously gets used, and over a period of time it's no longer there. So the bank's not going to finance your TheraBand. Typically, my bank, I would ask for all that initial inventory of acupuncture needles, TheraBand, tape, all of that. I did try and put in the capital needs, and depending on the time and the year that we were opening a particular clinic, sometimes I would get some financing for that initial capital. Often the bank will want cosigners, particularly if you are not bringing any of your own money to the table. So sometimes you don't have to bring your own money. Way back when, in my case, I owned a house that had some equity, so I did have to leverage my house. So I basically signed a document to the bank that said if things went south, they would get all of the equipment and my house. So there are ways that you can try and keep your personal assets out of the equation. It usually means actually showing to the bank that you're bringing a percentage of cash to the business transaction. Definitely always think about shopping around, even amongst the standard banks of, TD, Bank of Montreal, RBC, those banks, because they often will change how they define their healthcare platform. So we've switched banks now 3 times over 25 years. So we were originally with Bank of Montreal, that we had some capital borrowing that at the time would have been at prime plus 3.5%. And RBC introduced a healthcare platform, and physiotherapists were included on that healthcare platform. And the borrowing was prime plus 0.5%. So we were able to move to that bank, and all of our capital loans were then at prime plus 0.5%, which was a significant savings for us. So do shop around, and the BDC, I believe that's the short form. They can also offer some creative financing as well. Okay, so this is what the bank really wants to see when it comes to numbers. So you need to know the difference between a cash flow and a profit and loss. So when we think about really either one of those, if we want to talk about a cash flow to begin with, a cash flow statement, if you Google it, is really just a mine are all on Excel sheets. They're nothing fancy, but it's a prediction of how much cash is going to be coming in every month and how much cash is going to be going out. That is not really the same as a profit and loss, because a profit and loss, the top part of your profit and loss statement is definitely about income, but your income isn't always the same as the cash coming in on a monthly basis, because some of your income, if it's coming from third-party funding sources like perhaps a motor vehicle accident insurance company or the WSIB insurance board, you might not get paid in the same month that you delivered that service. So the cash flow is your prediction of what are you actually going to get paid for in that month, and what are the bills that you have to pay for in that month. Whereas the profit and loss is all of the income that got booked to that month. And then the loss part of, or the bottom part of the profit and loss is all of the expenses that are associated with that particular month. So you'll have your income minus your expenses, which will definitely give you whether you're ahead of the game or not. The interesting difference that, again, I learned a little bit the hard way is when you look at a profit and loss and you look at your expenses. For example, if you borrow money and I would hazard to guess if you're borrowing money for leaseholds and equipment for a typical orthopedic clinic, you're probably borrowing between $250,000 and $300,000. When you borrow that, you have to make a monthly loan payment. The bank obviously wants to get paid. The portion of the loan payment that shows up on your profit and loss is only the interest. So you can only deduct from your income the interest. But on a monthly basis, the actual true money leaving the clinic is the whole loan payment. So you'll start to see the differences between the cash flow statement and the profit and loss. The cash flow statement is really what the bank wants to see because they want to make sure that you have enough money coming in to actually pay your bills. The profit and loss will show them, on paper, what is going to be your break-even point. So that gets a little bit kind of accounting background, and I will show you some examples. So the not the hard part, but what I would challenge you to be thinking about is how do you determine how much money is coming in? Of course, you have to make a guess on how many new patients that you're going to see on a daily and a weekly basis. And you also have to make a guess or an estimation of how often are you going to treat those people. And for us, when we had to make that decision of what was our best guess as to how often we were going to treat those people, we actually just looked at the research studies that you guys are seeing on a regular basis. If you look at a study on shoulder pain or back pain and you look at the actual study, how often did they see people in that study in order for them to expect a clinical change? Most studies, I think you're going to find dosage is going to be somewhere between 2 and 3 times a week or 6 to 8 weeks. That tends to be a clinical window that is often used in research studies. So on the high end, 3 times a week over 8 weeks would be 24 treatments. On the low end, 2 times a week over 8 weeks would be 16 treatments. So you could be looking at numbers like that. If you took the time to do some investigation of the companies in your area, you can often find out what their actual coverage is for physiotherapy. And while there are going to be some exceptional plans for physiotherapy, most insurance companies annually tend to cover somewhere between $500 and $800, which, if you divide by your expected treatment fee, is definitely not going to provide 16 or 24 treatments. So then you have to start to think about, well, how many treatments would I need to actually produce a clinical change and help people meet their healthcare goals? So when you're predicting your income, you are making your best guess. And I feel that that guess should be reflective of clinical practice versus making income goals and then forcing your clinical practice into those income goals. Because it is a healthcare service, we want to deliver a good physiotherapy service. So we want to make sure that the income goals that we're setting are reflective at minimum as to what we're seeing in the literature. So that's how I come up with income and number of visits that we would potentially expect someone to be seen. On the expense side of things, from a cash flow perspective, what are all the bills that you're going to be paying on a monthly basis? What are all the expenses that are going to show up on your profit and loss? These are a few. Rent and your wages will be by far your biggest percentage of expenses. So you'll want to make sure that you're collecting the money as quickly as possible so that you can be hopefully paying yourself or your other professional and administrative supportive staff. Okay, so we talked about this a little bit already. The first thing that you need to do in either case for a cash flow or a profit and loss is project your income. So we talked about all of this. There's the profit and loss will give you what I call paper profit. Paper profit is not always the same as real cash. In fact, it rarely is the same for the reasons that I spoke of, because the cash flow will be looking at specifically the income that you truly collect, whereas the income on a profit and loss may not be the income that you're truly collecting. And of course, the expenses that are showing up on a cash flow are the true expenses that you're seeing money leave the clinic, whereas on the profit and loss, the expenses are really just the expenses that are allowed to reduce your income according to CRA. So that's another good draw. Like if you're a self-employed physio starting your own practice, you're not going to be on a payroll. So there's not going to be a true expense, because if you're self-employed or you're in a general partnership, essentially if you're not on a payroll, and the only way you're going to be on a payroll is if you choose to incorporate your company off the get-go, which we can talk about. But that's the only way that you could be on a payroll. Otherwise, any wage that you take, as far as the government is concerned, is just to draw on the profit that shows up on your profit and loss. So again, if you know that to pay your own personal bills, you need to take $1,000 a month, you will never see an expense line on your profit and loss that says $1,000 a month. So you will have to account for that draw on your cash flow analysis. So simply put, cash flow is always about cash in, cash out. And I think that I would like to show you what those look like. How we doing? Everyone still there? Are you sleeping, or any chat? Any questions so far? No, we're good. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing that presentation and we will share examples of cash flow. So there are probably great templates about this. I'm just going to go back here. I'm a bit perplexed as to why I can't see both. Someone is typing. Can you guys see the Excel sheet? Yes, okay, perfect, thank you. Okay, so this is an older version of it's old data. So the assessment fee and all of this thing is very archaic. But you can see that we made an estimate that we were going to see 30 patients a month. So that's approximately 5 new patients a week. What were we going to charge people for that assessment? That was $70. What about we were a clinic that was going to see all spectrums of funding sources. There are definitely clinics out there that are opting out of MBA and WSIB. You can see what the fee for an MBA assessment is, and you might think, wow, that's a lot more than the regular private assessment until you see the paperwork that comes with that. So this was going to be our estimate of how much assessment income. So you can see that we said on average that we would see people 12 times. I can tell you that that's probably a bit high. From our experience now in private practice, we would see probably an average number of 10. So, I mean, I could change that just to illustrate what that does to the cash flow. So we're going to see each one of those 30 new people 150 times. At the time, we were billing $42 a treatment. So we had a guess on what our treatment revenue would be. And we had some unique programs that we offered at the time. So in any event, this was what we were aiming for if we got those 5 new patients a week and we actually saw them. But you'll see that this is what we billed out, but we in that month we have no money. Like we don't have any money. So when I presented this to the bank, that we're already starting in a deficit. So at the time, our billing practices were that we would bill that out to people's insurance. Nothing was electronic. Of course, everything took a month before we got anything back. So we had to recognize that that first month of operations that we were not going to have any money in our bank account. And we didn't have any money. We did not put any money into the business. So you'll see that then we went through and gave our best guess at what things were going to cost us. And we knew what our rent was. That was one thing that we did know. And you can see that this is going back many, many years ago. Our admin at that time would have worked 40 hours a week times $12 an hour times 52 weeks a year. So that was our administrative wage for that month. You know, of course, we had bank charges, you have commission fees on credit cards. You've got your loan interest of the money that you've borrowed. You've got your line of credit interest, and that is what we asked the bank for. So we asked the bank for capital borrowing to buy all of our equipment, and then we asked for an operational line of credit. So right out the get-go, we were in debt. We had some advertising that we had to account for. And this was the draw that we took. The owners took $500 a week to live off of. So in that very first month of operations, the cash that was leaving the clinic was $25,000. And we had no money to offset it. So immediately we were in our line of credit by $25,000. So then you go through the whole same thing for your next month. You know, we've increased our expected new patients. So if we scroll down to the bottom, lo and behold, we're hoping to earn more income. And in this case, even this was a bit overzealous in that we assumed we would collect 100% of what we billed out. In our business, we have a very good collection policy, so we actually only write off less than 2% of our income. So in the end, this was a good estimate, but in most businesses, they would allow for a bigger margin of what is called doubtful accounts, that people don't pay their bills. So in this case, we added $13,000, we collected the 9, and if you scroll down to the bottom, you know, we're going to have, you can see that some of those initial startup costs are not included. So the cash out wasn't as significant because some of those things we didn't need to rebuy. So the second month we're in business, cash out for expenses was $15,000. But we collected from our clients $9,000. So that means we're actually only going to be going into our line of credit by a smaller amount. We did end up getting some money put into our bank account because we knew our landlord was going to be providing some landlord distributions. So you can simplify this now, I think, based on how you collect your money. So I don't want to make this more complicated because this was a little bit complicated based on how we collected our money at that time. But in our business now, anytime someone comes in for their physiotherapy, they actually pay for the physiotherapy on the spot. We do direct electronic billing to their insurance company, and the next day they're reimbursed from their insurance company, whatever that they are going to get reimbursed. So if I was to redo this cash flow, it would be much more forgiving because that money that I'm billing out, I probably have collected 70% of it or more, depending on how much is MVA and WSIB, because those funding sources do take anywhere from 90 to 120 days to actually collect. So the point of the cash flow is that you're going to keep going through every month of generating how much income that you're going to get. So like this is an interesting month. I'm trying to remember what my rationale was for why February we were going to bill less than January. It's probably a shorter month. But we went through every month and did our expected income, and we went through every month and did our expected expenses. So cash in, cash out. And we could see what sort of cash flow situation you're in. So you can see this is the first month that the cash in compared to the cash out actually left us with some real money to pay down the line of credit that we had been building up. But then the next month, because it's a shorter month, our cash in, cash out didn't work out so well. So it does show you, particularly in this method of how we were collecting money, that from a cash flow analysis standpoint, you're not always going to be in a surplus, even though when you look at your profit and loss, you may find that you are positive. So in this case, if you look at the whole year prediction of cash in, cash out, we've predicted that we were going to bill $276,000 in total billings. And these are the totals for all of the, not necessarily expenses, but all of the cash out, because our owner's draws are in there at 26,000. So we were going to have a total disbursements or cash out of 242,000. So we actually, on a profit and loss perspective, show that we're $34,000 ahead, but our line of credit is that we're in the whole $30,000. So really, we're only cash positive by 4,000. And that's the tricky part when you're trying to make predictions for, particularly how much money will be available for the owner to take as a draw, because that first year of operations, how quickly you're collecting the money is going to really indicate how much money is available. So comparatively speaking, if we look at a simplified P&L that just looks at, okay, let's go back to here. So in this case, at the top, we were guesstimating $276,000 in income. So maybe somewhere between these two numbers. And then when you're doing your profit and loss for the bank, you got to still get that number from somewhere. Like, where are you going to get that number of how much money are you going to make? You're going to get that from your cash flow analysis. But then you're only going to be booking here expenses that are true write-offs. So these are going to be all of the expenses that are associated with running a clinic. And you'll notice that when we get down to banking, as an example, the only thing that you can write off are the interest of your line of credit or your capital loan interest, even though there was a much bigger cash flow requirement to service those loans. The interest is the only thing that reduces your actual profit. You also have to make estimations. In this case, we have an admin making the big $12 an hour, but we've assumed that we've hired a staff physio. So in our budgeting, we'll assume that our staff physios, if they're an experienced physio, we expect our all-in employee expense to be 50%. That's not to say the physio is getting 50%, because if they're on payroll, we still have other expenses that we have to remit. So we're saying our whole expenses related to that physio being on payroll are going to be 50%. So you'll see that with these income numbers, I've assumed, what if it was all done by staff? What's the expense going to be for their wages? Because the owner's wages aren't reflected there at all. And we can see in the different scenarios what our actual profit would be. So profit on a one physio clinic was $50,000 or a 32% profit margin. That doesn't mean that $51,000 was available to take because the loan payment still had to come out of that $50,000. The actual loan payment isn't really reflected on the profit and loss. But the bank will want to see that you are going to eventually generate profit. And you will want to see as an owner that there will be profit that you could draw from for your own wages. Because in my experience, as an owner, most physios are not only treating, but they're managing the business. And you're working considerably more than your staff physio that is coming to work to see clients. So again, this is just a simple Excel sheet. There is no way that you would not be able to find a nice clean version of an accounting template that you could use in your business plan, but you will need to show the bank those two statements, one being your profit and loss, the second being your cash flow analysis. So, hi Jackie, in your experience, have you seen opportunities to purchase clinic space rather than lease? Well, absolutely. We own two of our buildings so we have 10 clinics and we own two of the buildings. We did not purchase off the get-go. Obviously, that would be another layer of risk that you would have. So there are things that I can tell you if you were looking at purchasing, because that would become another financing need. It would be interesting to see how the bank would respond to you buying a building and starting a brand new practice in it. I know when we bought our buildings, we were an established clinic. So there are things called owner occupied financing, where if your business occupies more than 50% of the building that you're buying, you can get preferred financing, which usually means that they will lend somewhere between 65 and 70% of the purchase price. So if the building cost $1 million, the bank's going to lend you at the most 750,000, which means you're going to have to come up with that difference as a down payment. Because from a cash flow standpoint, often servicing the mortgage isn't a lot different than paying rent. It's just the level of comfort the bank will have if your business is actually viable enough to be their guarantee that you'll be able to pay your mortgage. So you can absolutely look to buying the buildings. And I think my experience has been very favorable to own the buildings. You get to control your second biggest expense being rent. So that's great. I feel like even if the business was to go south, which we all hope it doesn't, at least you have an asset being the building that you could sell. So it's really just whether the bank thinks your business is strong enough. Okay, I'm going to show you one other thing to close this off to hopefully wrap it up for you. And I very purposely picked very dated things because I wanted to protect lots of people's privacy. Oh, I'll add this to the chat, but I forgot where I found this, but here is a basic physiotherapy checklist, which I thought was pretty darn exhaustive, that you could go through and check out equipment list. So summary that I wanted to show you. So this again was done in 2006, so very old. We opened a clinic in Milton. I gave those kind of unique things about our clinic location, where we were. There wasn't another physiotherapy clinic. We had good anchors. Talked about the population was projected to double. We were going into the area where the population was doubling. Um, Based on the proposed market analysis, we were predicting that this clinic would be a 2 to 3 physio clinic. A little bit about my business partner at the time, what his experience was, where we would draw our referral sources from. So thinking about that basic level of marketing that you could go into more detail. At the time I didn't. Now, mind you, this was not our first clinic that we opened, so it was easier for us to go to our bank, who our competitors were, what our time frame was, our financial needs. I would attach it as an Excel sheet. So I would outline what our capital needs would be, which would be all of our equipment. And as I mentioned earlier, I would always try and put as much equipment into that package as possible. And then what our operational line of credit would be. And that would be the introduction letter to our package that we would send, that would include that more detailed analysis of our, sorry, I'm having trouble speaking and clicking at the same time. It would be that would be our short introduction letter that we would include our profit and loss and our cash flow analysis and our list of our capital equipment needs. So I think that is it. I'm happy to answer any questions about business plan or actually about our clinics. Didn't really give a good introduction about our business. So we're 25 years old last year. So we're in our 26th year and we're in 8 different cities. We have 10 different clinics now. I have bought and sold several clinics along the way, and have all been very good learning experiences. And yeah, we're still in a very exciting time and hoping to grow. I see someone typing, so I'm just going to wait to see what the question is. I'm assuming that you guys do have access to microphones. Please feel free to speak versus type too. Oh, we don't have access to microphones. Oh, that's okay. That's good to know. I assume that every laptop would have that. There's a couple other typing questions, so I'm just waiting on the bubbles. The microphone's been disabled. Very strange. Hmm. What would you consider to be the most important referral source? Yeah, so I mean, I think that, so the question is, what would you consider to be the most important referral source? Meeting with family physicians, online marketing, or word of mouth? So I will talk a little bit about this in the marketing talk, and it's definitely changed over the last 25 years. Um, I I think that the medical referral source is still very important and has shown to be ongoingly important in our business. So that is something that we've been very consistent over 25 years. We regularly meet with physicians. We have a very educational marketing platform. Um, Over time, we used to have, I mean, there's still like over 350 physicians that might refer, but they used to be, Dr. Jackie would refer 5 patients a week. But because I think we did really well with those clients, then of course our word of mouth numbers started to refer. So at this point in time, our word of mouth referral rate is broaching on 70%. So that means 70% of every initial assessment that we do, the client is identifying that they heard about the clinic through one of our word of mouth categories, which, if I was to give some advice, and this is a much more around the marketing talk, is to really recognize that early. And that's when I said at the beginning, don't minimize the similarities that we have with the hairdressers, with your dentist, all of these service related businesses. You do want to have a very solid engagement platform in your marketing with your current and your previous clients, because in my experience, the word of mouth has grown exponentially. And that is overall why I think our clinics grow, because while that referral source is growing, then we're also continuing our medical marketing. So we're still getting those direct referrals from the different levels of medical community. And the last piece with online marketing, for sure, that is very important. And I personally find that a lot of physios that are running their own business are very willing to be on social media and to really self promote, and it can be quite an effective tool. In our business, our physios don't need to do that because they're getting clients filling their schedule anyway. So I almost feel like we attract physios that don't want to do that either. They want, some of our physios don't even have social media personally. So the last thing that they want to do is be on there marketing their services for physio. But it is absolutely effective. I can tell you that our strategic goal is to have 10% of our initial assessments come from Google. So we do pay for Google AdWords, and then of course try and meet all of the algorithm requirements of Google to have people identify that they're finding us because of Google. So as an example, one of the platforms that we use, I can track if someone looks us up on their phone. The number that they click on to call the clinic is actually a tracking number. It's not our actual clinic's number. So then I can look on that platform for how many people called the clinic, and then I can cross-reference their telephone number with our initial assessment telephone numbers in the same time period. So I can tell you objectively that on a monthly basis, our Google AdWord investment pays for the amount of new clients that we see. So that answers that question. Brandon, your question, what has been your strategy for advertising and how it translated into new clients coming through the doors? Do you find word of mouth the most effective, or what you prefer? So our overall platform across all referral touch points is educational. We're not a clinic that's known to put a good golf tournament on, and that's why we get clients. Whether we're out doing free talks in the community, or whether we're doing lunch and learns with medical touch points, we have a very educational platform. So that is often how we get people in the door. And then from there, our word of mouth or our client engagement strategies continue to grow year after year. So those two things are really important. How do or would you approach medical marketing as a new clinic? I think that, you want to always think about it. If we're thinking about family docs, what are you going to do to make their life easier? I don't think going in and saying, hey, I'm Jackie, I opened up down the street, please send me patients, is necessarily going to engage them to refer people. But again, we go in with an educational platform that, For example, our number one joint is the shoulder joint. So we'll go in and review with them when they should send clients for an ultrasound, an X-ray, an MRI, and when physiotherapy can be useful. So we're trying to help expedite their filtering system. And, we can say you know, the shoulder is our joint of interest. That's what we like to treat. And, we're in a geographic area where there are no other physiotherapy clinics. Um, a lot of doctors, for lots of different reasons, can be quite sensitive to feeling like they're choosing a physiotherapy clinic over another, but will often make that choice if they feel that that particular clinic actually has a unique program that their client is going to do better with. So that gets back to how I would market to the medical community is I would know what I'm good at. And when you say what you're good at, make sure that you're willing to invest the time. We say we're good at the shoulder, but we spend a lot of time reviewing studies. We spend a lot of time mentoring our junior staff on shoulder treatment so that when people do come in with shoulder pain, that it doesn't matter who you see, they feel like they know a lot about the shoulder. Like when you are looking for potential partners around a new location, so our most successful partnerships are definitely coming out of knowing that we share the same philosophy of practice. So we often will not talk about partnerships with people until we've worked with them for some time. All of our partners do have their advanced credentialing done in the manual therapy or sport or pelvic. So we do look for our partners to be clinical leaders. So often we take on, and that's how we've grown. All of our locations are now owned or managed by physios that initially started off working for us, but expressed interest in ownership and we're willing to become a clinical leader. So for us, those discussions around partnership are not just about business, but knowing that we share the same philosophy of practice. Whole bunch of people typing. So I would have loved to figure out how to get the microphone off, but I'm going to have to ask my marketing and communications person. Oh. Sorry, I'm coming back to you. Okay. Do you try and maintain consistent margins or do they vary month to month? Yeah, absolutely. The margins will vary. Um, so we like to not only from a profit margin standpoint, but also to try and create a culture that all of our professional staff like to work in. We try and keep our private insurance funding at least 70% of our patient population because those clients do tend to be I'm making very broad strokes here, but they do tend to be highly motivated clients that don't come with a lot of extended paperwork, so are not the same type of administrative burden on either the professional staff or the administrative staff. So we like to try and keep that funding source at least 70% or higher, and have our combined MBA WSIB funding no more than 30%. So we are careful on how much we market to those third party payers, which will also affect your overall profit margins. Just another question coming up here. The other thing that I'll say while I'm waiting for this question to come in, that COVID really did highlight to us was those third party funding groups that were coming from WSIB and MBA. I know a lot of clinics have opted out of that, which I think is a bit tricky from a marketing standpoint. To go to the medical doctors and say, you know what, I'm only going to treat your private people, like only send me the good clients. I don't want to deal with, the clients that come with extended baggage. We never really wanted to say that to the physicians. We felt like we should be an inclusive clinic that gave everyone the opportunity for good care. Having said that, I mentioned that we do control how many WSIB will come into the clinic, but we still are accepting WSIB people. And the other thing that it did teach me during COVID was that those funding sources actually were a stable foundation for the clinic. We bounced back really quickly because we had those funding sources. Whereas, it would look like from the outside looking in at some of our competitors that were exclusively private insurance, they seem to be slower to get their staff back. So, I mean, I obviously don't know that firsthand, but that is just sort of an observation. Yeah, so with regards to competitors, there are so many more clinics everywhere now. How do you navigate this? And I think the market has changed. And I had someone ask me about, like, what's the point of saturation? Like, obviously, no one understands what the point of saturation is. The great thing for the physiotherapy profession is if you're positioning yourself in a city that, like most of our cities in Southern Ontario, are growing, then having more and more physios on every corner doesn't necessarily hurt you. It actually increases awareness. I think it's harder and harder to build a larger physiotherapy practice. I think you're seeing people that are maybe not that entrepreneurial, that really just want to create a job and, really be, in control of, their own hours or whatever the case may be. So you're seeing a lot of 1 to 2 physiotherapy clinics. So how do we navigate this? We do look at that in some of those ratios still. Like, I still will look and see overall how many physios are listed in Guelph compared to dentists, and then, how many family docs are there. So I do look at those demographics, and I still will. When we opened the women's health clinic, that clinic only opened 5 years ago. So certainly there were a lot of physios in Guelph by the time we opened that clinic. But again, we went to an area that, there wasn't another clinic in walking distance to where the clinic was. And we were very niched at that point. Like, that clinic was specifically a women's health clinic that primarily did pelvic physiotherapy. So it didn't even matter that, an orthopedic clinic was 6 blocks away, because they didn't even offer pelvic physiotherapy anyway. In fact, they refer to us because, we're doing pelvic physio. There's one other question coming in. Oh, maybe we're good. If anyone does have any follow-up questions, my email is pretty simple, Jackie@aramosaphysio.com. I'm definitely happy. I've been doing quite a bit of mentoring in the physiotherapy community for mostly women, because I think it was a lot harder for people having kids and raising families, but that's a slight bias. But I'm happy to mentor anybody that has questions, and I think that we've learned a lot along the way, so I'm happy to share that. I see someone typing. Certainly feel free to go at any time. I'm glad I'm getting lots of comments that the information I really hope that I made things practical and at least introduced you to some new language that you might not have heard in the physiotherapy program. Great. You guys have my email. Happy to answer any questions. And I hope you have a great night. And maybe I'll see some of you next week. Bye, guys.